Hello，大家好，我快速换一下台哈。This is actually the first English episode of Planet Speakeasy. Before we start, here is a quick note in Mandarin. 这期的播客之所以用英文来录呢，是因为它是字面意义上的外宾视角，访问的是两个曾经住在北京，但是在疫情前搬离中国的朋友。他们最近都短暂的回到了这个被自己曾经当作家的地方，而我特别好奇的是，在疫情分隔了这么多年之后，对他们而言，什么变了，什么没变？对谈的文字翻译版呢，可以在端传媒的行星酒馆专栏找到。其实我也希望有一天我们能够完全跨越语言的隔阂，像那些很牛叉的播客一样，用同声传译把对话呈现给大家。不过那还蛮贵的。如果想要实现这个梦想呢，请大家在 Patreon 和爱发电上支持我们，谢谢。
中国现在方便到特别不方便的这个水平。It's like everything is so cool. If you're in the apps, everything's so easy. But if you're outside of that system, you are totally screwed.
Everyone's observations of China, be if they're Chinese or not Chinese and they live in China for a period of time, is going to be colored by their own subjective lens and their experiences. And to pretend that we don't have these subjective lenses, which I think is often the case when it comes to media coverage, is just wrong.
Chinese podcast, there's a big no-no. You're not supposed to record Chinese podcasts with English words scattered, like 中英夹杂. But today maybe we're gonna do like 英中夹杂.
I'm a huge fan of 英中夹杂. The reverse, not 中英夹杂。
Matt 可以都说
都行，可能我们时间长，应该英文多，中文少。
挺好的，要的就是这种流动性。Yeah, today we're having this conversation. The tentative working title for this is called Homecoming Vibe Check, because at one point we all have a home somewhere in mainland China. Beyond that vague geopolitical sense of China, it's an actual place where we have friends, we know people there, we have our community, we build our lives. And now I know both of you guys have just recently gone on a trip back. So the whole talk is about how does it feel and what changed, what hasn't, not just for the country, but also like for ourselves. Before we dive in, do you guys want to introduce yourself?
I'm Ling. 我在媒体工作. I work in media.
我是 Matt. 我之前是在中国生活了大概5年. So my first year was in Xi'an. I graduated college in 2010 and moved right away to Xi'an, did a year in Xi'an, and then 4 years in Beijing. So it's kind of like I'm 西安户口北京长大的那种北京.
Yeah, that's a lot of years.
Yeah, I mean, at the time I was, at least for the second half of it, I was a journalist. And while I was there, I was always playing Ultimate Frisbee. And so I had just a ton of chances to like travel around the country and stuff like that. But yeah, it's, 我上次去是18年的12月份, 然后19年没去, 然后 COVID, yeah, 就今年暑假的时候, 夏天的时候去了一次.
Yeah. And Ling, how about you?
I moved to Beijing in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there up until the end of December 2021.
Right.
And I left very kind of abruptly and unexpectedly. 就是一直都想回去, 但这2年都没回去. And then I finally went back a couple months ago. And so I missed a very intense period of time in Beijing.
When I just left New York, I was going to Hong Kong, the first stop. In the airport, that was 2022 of September. So the whole flight are like Chinese diaspora. They're like living in different parts. And the whole conversation was about, oh, I just went to Amsterdam and there's a flight. You don't need as much paperwork. And people just whisper about all these different pathways to go back to China. And I assume this time, like when you guys go back, yeah, the whole process is very different.
Process different, feelings different. This time when I went back in the summer, it's technically a work trip. I was going there for a US-China dialogue. Visa, I had to get a new visa. That was for like scholarly exchange, and my ticket was paid for by other people. In the old days, pre-COVID days, I would just basically, I had a 10-year business visa. I'm definitely not a businessman, but I had a 10-year business visa, could go over there, would just land, shoot out 15 different WeChats to people, and then kind of start either working or seeing friends from there. But this time was much more official process, invitation letter, all that stuff, and then have fun on the sidelines.
How does it feel? Like going any kind of worry or just anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, there's some, you probably hear this from a lot of different foreigners. A lot of people have some, Americans have anxiety about going to China. They think maybe it's unsafe. I think that's a very complicated question. And most of the times it's not a problem at all, but maybe sometimes a little bit. So, I had a little bit of that in mind, but I was doing the right way. I was doing the very official travel back. And so I wasn't too nervous about that going into it. I mean, I was just so happy. I was so happy to be back. And I mean, just even walking out of the airport, I flew into Beijing, walking out of the Beijing airport, literally just smelling it was like midnight pollution, like midnight jiaochu pollution. And I was just like, yes, I've got a thing for it. I love that city. I love that feeling. I love that smell. So
is it still like the smell of chaos?
It definitely was, way less chaos than when I arrived in 2010. Xi'an 2010 versus Beijing 2023, huge difference, way less chaos. And even in Beijing, compared to 2019, still, it's a lot, it's like all the kind of rough edges have been sanded off to some degree. A lot of that just kind of, life on the street, the xiaotar, the jianbing, a lot of that stuff just isn't what it was before. But, the city still has life to it. So less chaotic, but still good.
Ling, did you go to Beijing as well?
Yes, I went to Beijing. And I'd say, Matt, in some ways my experience was almost the opposite of you because I'd been going in a lot throughout all of COVID. I think I did quarantine twice. So I was used to having a super just tedious, scary process where I'd have to go through quarantine, go through all the hoops. And this time it was just really weird to show up and just be no mask, no, I don't need to do all these tests. I can just roll through. And so I was just overwhelmingly very, very anxious at only a few days into arriving, settling in, was I just huge sigh of relief. There was a big kind of build up before going. But Matt, to your point, I think definitely even within a year, the edges have been sanded off. In some ways, Beijing is a lot more livable of a place. It was already kind of going in that direction, just the entire gentrification of Liangmajiao. I think you tweeted about this. Everyone who goes back to Beijing after a while and sees Liangmajiao is oh my God, this is gorgeous. What happened here? But yeah, there's even, more than a year out, there are moments of just shit, this, I'm back in Beijing. The pollution is one thing. I think the moment for me is when I go into a Beijing fruit stall and I buy a pomelo.
Okay.
Because I ate so many pomelos in Beijing during pomelo season. And I realized when I got a pomelo this time, I was I haven't eaten a pomelo in a year.
Right.
Because it's such a Beijing fruit, you know what I mean? It's just not a fruit I associate with anywhere else in the world, so.
I was completely distracted by the smell of pomelo, just thinking about it. Speaking of buying, I have a major concern right now. All of my WeChat and Alipay stopped working for me. I heard it has been quite a problem for visitors going back to China now. Have you guys encountered a similar kind of problem?
Yeah, I'll talk about my experience. I think it's different for everybody based on how long you've been gone. I mean, I was Weixin支付for everything when I was living there, and all the way up through 2018. I thought all these foreigners who came to China and couldn't use WeChat. I was yeah, you're so outla, you don't get it, man. And then this time I go back and I worked for a very long time to try to get my Weixin支付working again. Eventually just impossible. It's connected to this number and that number is connected to, just an endless cycle through that. Eventually I was able to get Drufubal working. Right. I had never used Drufubal before, but eventually could get that working tied to a credit card. The big mistake that I made, and this was in hindsight stupid, but it really did mess up my trip, was I used an American number on roaming in China rather than using a Chinese local number.
Right.
And so I could like make phone calls and I had data and could use Wi-Fi and all that stuff. But for anything, like for the Didi, Gongxiang Danche, all these things, they need to send you a confirmation code in order to like get your account started. And I couldn't get any of these things going. And so like my second night there, I hadn't realized that basically there's no way to hail a taxi on the street, which is just how I did everything before. And so I'm out drinking until like maybe 1, 2 a.m., like not crazy, but I go out to hail a taxi and like every store is shut down. There is not a single taxi that will stop for me. I spent 90 minutes on the side of the second ring road, Bei Erhuan, eventually caught a bus like halfway across town. I was at the point of desperation to where I was thinking about what are the logistics of stealing a bike. Like I was like a 2-hour walk from my hotel. I have a foot injury, so I can't walk that far. It's getting to be like 3:30 in the morning. I'm thinking about stealing a bike. Finally, I just like stand in front of a taxi and I'm like, "Sir, please stop. I will give you this 100 kwai bill to drive not that far." It was genuinely super hard to get around Beijing.
So you hitchhiked.
I mean, well, I paid the man. But it took it was crazy how much convincing it took them to like dramatically overpay for a taxi. I still had to really lobby them. But yeah, the way I put it, when I was there, we talked to people at the foreign ministry and they were like, "What's up with China-US relations?" And And I was like, if you want, Americans to come back, you need to have a station right at the airport that just hooks every foreigner up with a WeChat account, a bank account, something like that. Because I was like, 中国现在方便到特别不方便的这个水平. It's like everything is so cool. If you're in the apps, everything's so easy. But if you're outside of that system, you are totally screwed. So that was my experience.
Yeah, it was a total pain in the ass, I have to say. Now that I hear Matt's story, it was like nowhere near as dire as that. Like I was able to hail things eventually, but when I went back, it was like a huge deja vu to when I first arrived in China. So like 5 years ago, I hadn't had that experience in so long that I forgot that things could be extremely inconvenient. And the key issue was that my phone number got canceled. And so this time I was very clear. I wanted to keep my phone number in case I went back. You can pay like a minimum fee every month. I just did not want it to get canceled. But the first day I arrived, what I did was I got a new number. But then you kind of have to like rehook, because like all your apps are 绑定到旧的电话号码, right?
Right.
And then you have to like unbonding it and then bonding it with the new number. But the crisis was that because so many people are going through this process, the new number actually still belongs to someone else.
Right.
So like I'm trying to get on Meituan, right? And I'm trying to order something. And when I try to bonding my Meituan onto the new number, they're like, "Oh, sorry, 已经被绑定了." And I'm like, who is this person? You know what I mean? Like, get off my number. So yeah, there was like 3 days where I was like very angry at every shared bike I encountered, because I, like instinctively, there's this muscle memory that's like, "Oh, 扫就可以了," right? And this time I'd saw and they'd be like, you need to share your number. And it was, but then, I was easing back into it.
Right. Yeah, it gives me major anxiety, to be honest. In America, there used to be this kind of phone plan where you can have a Chinese number associated with an American phone number. There's some kind of partnership. And just after this whole deal is canceled, I lose my Chinese phone number and all of my services are gone.
You're a victim of the trade war.
Yes.
That's decoupling. In my world, everyone's always talking about tech decoupling, all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And, whatever. Yeah. Most stuff just goes on, but like, when you lose these linkages, they are hard to get back going again.
Right. Any kind of other like discomfort or something that we gotta like get reacquainted with?
For me, like maybe discomfort is a strong word, but there was a lot of like, there are just some new like realities. So like when I was there, I was super into Chinese ultimate frisbee scene. Like I co-founded a team in Xi'an. I played on Beijing Daga, and I was really, really invested in growing the Chinese ultimate frisbee scene, and I loved it. That was my favorite way to meet and hang out with Chinese people. And in the time I was there, it was a beautiful, beautiful thing. Like the way that as a culture smash. And I was always within my teams, I was always like, okay, we need to rebalance this. Not so many foreigners and so few Chinese. We need to get more Chinese people involved and get them into leadership and all that stuff.
Right.
And this time when I went back, it's like the ratio had 100% flipped on my former team in Beijing Daga. where one, like ultimate frisbee has gone crazy in China. It's become like the ultimate, quote unquote fashion sport on Xiaohongshu. And so like the number of people playing has quadrupled and it's gone crazy. And then within my own like social circles, my former team has gone from maybe 70-30 or 60-40 like foreigners and Chinese to now like 95-5 Chinese on that way. And which is in some ways those were the teams that I always wanted to play on when I was in China. And it's interesting to watch like the cultural dynamic shift. Like we used to after practice go out and just get a jiachang cai and like tons of food and tons of beer and everybody gets drunk together at like 1 p.m. on a Saturday. And now it's changed to like a small group of us, we're going to go get a baojian, no alcohol, all qi shui. Like the food is so much better. The environment is so much sort of quieter and calmer.
Right.
And it made me think a lot about what I loved over there, how much was kind of about sort of being, directly, deeply embedded in sort of Chinese culture and Chinese society in a way, and how much I love just the culture smash, the bringing together and the mixing and like the grading and all that stuff of two countries together and or two cultures. So I don't know, it's one of those things where it's like, this is exactly what I wanted, and it's a little bit different than I imagined in a lot of ways. It's gotten much more official and bureaucratized, and there's now like frisbee corruption and like all this super weird stuff.
Frisbee corruption.
Frisbee corruption. It's corruption within the ranks of frisbee structures. It's pretty weird, but I don't know. It just made me think a lot about what's a culture mix and what's like a total sort of conversion and stuff like that. It was interesting.
Right.
Matt, I would totally read an article about frisbee corruption. Or like a step-by-step guide, like how to cultivate frisbee guanxi, you know what I mean?
It's just wild.
Yeah, I guess that's like more like sadness, right? As opposed to discomfort.
Right.
Or just like, I feel like I'm hearing from a lot of people who go back, and I definitely felt this as well, just like there are things that you miss. Like there are things that used to be this way that are gone.
Right.
And like to a certain extent, this is like every person who like is living in Beijing in some golden era and then goes back and that golden era is gone, right? Arguably I arrived after everything great about Beijing was already gone. But still, when I arrived, I was just like so wide-eyed. I was like, there's so much to do. I'm in love with this place. It's so bustling. I think what I loved about it that I haven't been able to recreate in any other city was just like how fluid social circles were. Like everyone was just like saw Weixin, like saw. Like I'm never gonna saw someone's WhatsApp in Hong Kong. You know what I mean? Like the ways in which acquaintances come together and become best friends, like the rate and speed of that. Yeah. I think I just have never found anywhere else other than Beijing. And this time, it was still there. Like I could still get that vibe, but it kind of slowed down a little. Like people are just kind of less, like I can't just walk into Jing'e and see like 20 people I know. This one craft beer brewery, I just walk in and I'd see everyone I knew. And new people would bring in new people. And this time it was just, there was less of that energy. Yeah. And I missed it. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I'm in this mourning kind of mode, but I get it all confused because in the past 3-4 years, there's a big separation, the lockdown, decoupling, and all of that. And it's also like me going from 20-something to 30-something. So I don't know, like, what these kind of things that I miss, are they my youth or like the vibe of Beijing?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of just la.
For sure.
And like I try, so I always hated when like old people would come in and tell me like, China 2010, like you should have been here in 95, I was like, yeah, dude, whatever. Like this is the shit right now. And I'm like, I'm sure that is going on some level. And I could see windows of it. I have some friends who are still there and just like, they're still doing just like awesome, cool things, just art. Yeah. Culture smash. And it's, I'm old. I have like obviously like lost touch and lost contact with so many people who are there. My friends have left, but it's like that stuff is always there. The little like seedlings and the little sprouts of it are always there. Like maybe 2023 is kind of like some weird version of like 1981 when like, you're coming out of some super strict, chaotic like lockdown era. And like, I don't know. It's vague ramblings, but I'm nostalgic and don't want to be like trapped in nostalgia.
No, I totally get it. I feel there has to be like some underground zines going on, like in some kind of circle that I'm too old to get access to at this point.
But I mean, honestly, like New York, I don't want to overhype it, but like what you and your circle and these other like circles of relatively young, most Chinese diaspora mixed with people who live there, mixed with Chinese American. I think what's going on in New York is pretty damn cool among all this stuff. And it's kind of like special, and I don't want to talk about it too much. It's not my thing to talk about, really.
I was just saying, like, one recurring theme that came up during conversations was like, obviously, like, should I go or should I stay? And this was like among many different circles. You know, I'm definitely aware of the fact that the social circles that I'm exposed to are, you know, at the end of it, they're pretty limited, and journalists, media workers, NGO workers, right? But there's definitely a lot of New York envy. There's a lot of like, I just don't have space to do the work that I want to do here anymore. But there was also a lot of, what are you going to lose? Like, when you leave, you're going to lose a lot, especially among NGO workers, especially among like underground NGO workers. It was like, I'm just going to lose touch completely with local communities. And I think it was like pretty frustrating for them to hear people, like friends abroad, be like, 你怎么还没出国呢? You know, 怎么还没认出去? And they're like, I got stuff to do here. Like, I have a whole world that I'm tapped into here. And I think we just like don't really see it anymore. It's like very hard to see. And New York, rightly so, is like this wonderful, bustling, vibrant community, and it's like all over Twitter. And you, like, Beijing isn't, you know what I mean? Like, the vibrant, bustling, at this point, very underground communities that are taking place in Beijing, just like, it's not online. It's like very offline.
Yeah, my friends who are in similar circles, they have a lot of this kind of conflict. Go abroad, a lot of people are still very much tortured. Pain versus survival guilt, we are all somewhere in between. And I think what we're missing probably on this trip we started to see is like, how can we get in touch with the locals again? I used to think, okay, I know the audience. I know my audience. And all of a sudden, they're talking about something that either I don't know or I don't know how to care about. I wrote and I produced a lot of things for an American audience. 90% of the work is not really telling the story, but explaining things. And then in the end, people kind of like get it in a sense, I understand this is what's happening. But now that I start writing in Chinese again, when I see a lot of Chinese comments, it's about, oh, I feel this way as well. That's a completely different weight. And I get a lot more joy and validation for it. Before I was very 卷 in American job market because there's a hole that hasn't been really fulfilled, which is this kind of emotional connection.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, since all of us have worked in media before, and I'm sure you're like familiar with this dynamic, but I think it was like even more prevalent this time, which is just the very act of like shining a spotlight on a community and trying to explain that community to the outside world puts it in some level of danger, right? So like just the act of putting the spotlight on, you already could mess something up. And so a lot of kind of just like being in Beijing was like, how can I see without shining the light? You know, I felt this a lot with, for example, the voguing community, which Tony, you know well, that I've been paying attention to, that you've been paying attention to for a while. And I went to a ball my last day in Beijing. And this time I went to the ball just purely for the purposes of experiencing the ball, which is very different from like going to a ball for the purposes of shining a spotlight on it so that other people can see it more clearly, you know, so that like BBC can see it more clearly, you know. And experiencing a ball as one of is just a radically different experience. Like, my role was not to observe and explain. My role was to like enjoy, just like immerse myself in it. And it was very moving to just see that something like that was still going on. Like, granted, not in the center of the city, not in like a Shanghai art museum with chandeliers and like absolute vodka sponsors, but like middle of nowhere, like after Wuhan, you know, like in a converted factory warehouse. It's just like no one even knows about. But it was still happening. And just being able to experience that and not have it to translate, not having to explain was really wonderful.
That's beautiful. I've seen a few home DJ set in Chiang Mai as well, yeah, from Chinese diaspora. And people, the younger generation, now I sound like 100 years old, but they're creating so much cool stuff. And a lot of times I feel a bit bad in the past few years because I have been fixated on my work and I didn't actually get to enjoy things. Later last year, if I open YouTube, like all my YouTube pages are English, there's just like 30 Rock or something like that, Schitt's Creek, I would just binge through the whole thing. But now I started to consume Chinese content again. I'm willing because I think a lot of Chinese YouTubers are better than the English YouTubers. And yeah, I'm obsessed. I don't know, have you guys experience this kind of similar, like I have more confidence where I have more courage to stare into the things I love?
I think like you've used this phrase on the podcast, I forget what it, like 你上次做一个完整的人是什么时候你做一个 you know, whatever that phrase is. That's like been haunting me for a while because when I ask myself that question, I'm like, oh shit, like it's been a long time. So I don't know, like especially when I was in Beijing, I felt whatever work-life balance, there was a part that was just fully and just like you're saying, like fully immersed and engaged and enjoying and experiencing without any kind of thoughts to how does this fit in? How do I explain this? How do I work on this? How do I do something with it? And I really just honestly listening to your podcast where you're interviewing your guests has made me feel, has haunted me and made me realize how Juan I am in my New York life. For a long time, I stopped consuming Chinese content that wasn't related to my work. I wouldn't watch Chinese TV shows or movies because I'm like, look, I do China all day at my job and it's bad vibes and I don't need more of that at night. Just very recently, I've started being like, you know what? No, like this is just culture. This is things that I like. I like this. So I've just been watching 叫什么甄嬛传 at the recommendation of one of your other guests who has personally shamed me for always talking about 蜗居, which I think is truly the greatest Chinese TV show ever created. But it's just been so nice to engage with it in an honest, direct, like emotional way instead of being like, this is work and therefore blank.
Yeah.
I feel like, Matt, we've had some iteration of this conversation before where it's like very clear for you, like what is work and what is not work. It's like correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but like making videos about Frisbee and like looking through AI governance papers are just like so different. Like the tasks just occupy such different worlds.
And too much of the latter and like not enough of the former.
But, you know, to play devil's advocate, because in support of your model of work, because mine is like almost the opposite. It's kind of nice to have some like separation of church and state. You know, it can get emotionally very fraught and like messy when your work is your life, or like when they start bleeding into each other. And I think, you know, even just thinking about these trips that we went on, like it was very clear to you, like you were there for work purposes and like there were tasks that you need to accomplish and the others were just like life. And I can't even really clearly say like why I was there. I mean, essentially I was there for a friend's wedding. I wanted to reconnect with some friends and I wanted to just like absorb the place again for the experiencing and observing, you know? So it can get very messy and it can get very emotional. I really love just like being at a voguing ball because I want to participate in that atmosphere. You know, like I love being around queer communities in China. I love seeing, you know, what's still going on. I want to reconnect with old friends. I want to see people that I used to know, you know, but I also like, I'm thinking of these like higher level questions of like, can queer spaces still continue to exist in, you know, in an environment where like those spaces are quickly being erased? So it's very conflicting. I sometimes just don't want to think about any of it, but then, you know, you're living it.
When you just said that, I was like, yeah, tears are just like rushing out. Like, what do you think?
That question? I mean, it's like a 180-degree turn since like I was in Shanghai in 2020, not to mention Beijing in 2019, right? Like the Beijing LGBT Center was hosting these like ragers on like hotel rooftops, you know, and just like hundreds of people would be there. Now the organization doesn't even exist. So definitely a huge 180. That being said, like this party was lit like this ball, there was like, I mean, okay, so like the contrast is, right, the Shanghai ball is like 500 people in an art museum on the Bund with chandeliers and everything, and like everyone was flying from across the country. This one, much smaller, like maybe 100 people out on the Fifth Ring Road. But people were there and they were really excited, and it was Halloween, so everyone was dressed up. It was probably like the highest concentration of like fishnet stockings and neck tats and stilettos, you know, I've seen in Beijing in my whole life. On one side of the room, there was just like people in like Cinderella ball gowns and stilettos and crazy makeup and piercings everywhere and like S&M whips, you know what I mean? Just like really just like one end of the extreme. And then on the other end, I saw on a couch, there were just like 5 middle-aged dudes with like identical buzz cuts, all wearing like vest, black jacket, just like completely out of place, just like so shocked to be there.
Probably a great educational experience.
I'm always looking out for them because it's honestly pretty cute. You know what I mean? It's like you were so out of place, bro.
Oh my God.
But yeah, I mean, like, sorry, digression from the broader.
No, I think one of the biggest realization when I feel like, okay, I'm losing touch with the place that I was so familiar with, is that I don't know what's permissible anymore. Before, you know, foreigners would be like, okay, you can't do this, you can't do that. This is how China works. I was like, that's because you're stupid. Like, I know what's going on, even though people from the outside think it's black box. I kind of know, but in the past 4 years, there's a very strong feeling like, I don't know anymore. And this is a huge fear for me. If I don't know, how am I going to tell stories? I'm losing the judgment of what's going on there. But now I realize if I don't start talking about this, I would never regain this sense of touch.
I think like Ling was saying earlier about sort of experience versus like, maybe I think of it as kind of like goal-oriented experience. Like I'm going to experience this, but it's because I need to understand it and therefore, you know, say something about it. I think like the greatest like possible luxury that you can have is the chance to just like, if you are going to eventually be a storyteller or a communicator or a facilitator, cultural facilitator related to a place, the greatest luxury that you can have is spending time there without any need to do any of that. I often thought about it with some of my favorite like foreign journalists who were ever in China. Almost all of them at some point just like lived there without any media journalist judgment hat. They just live there and you just have time to just like absorb things very slowly without thinking about it. I think for me, like by far the most valuable like year or years was when I was just teaching English in Xi'an and had basically no one cared about what I had anything to say. No one cared and I could just kind of absorb it. I think in this kind of reacquaintment phase or like just trying to get those baselines again, like you're talking about, the luxury that maybe some people can have and maybe other people can't have is the luxury of just like spending time there without any need to do any of that, whether that's just like 3 weeks during Chunjie or something else, a time to just be there and not try to like analyze and express. You need those like baseline setting times before you can start to analyze.
For sure. There's also like virtue in like going in with a blank slate, you know? Like I think in some ways I'm already tainted. Tony, you're tainted. Matt, you're tainted. You know what I mean? Like when you're just absorbing all this information, if you are the type of person who's like reading Age of Malaise before you go in, right? You're going to be looking for the malaise, right? I mean, and I found myself doing that, right? Like, I mean, I think it doesn't discount the observations. Like it's still true that like a lot of people are a lot more kind of resigned and sadder than when I'd seen them a couple of years ago. But then the questions that I ask lead with the underlying assumption that things are not going well.
Yeah.
Which is also not false, right? It's like when people are telling me things are not going well, I can't be like, well, I only talked to like 20 people in my small circle in Beijing, so things actually must be going brilliantly everywhere else. You know, it's not like it's like things are great. But I do feel the like overarching framework of looking China from the lens of that horrible word, China watcher, right? Like who watches a country? But, you know, but that's the information that like, that I'm consuming a lot. And so it will inevitably shape the lens.
One thing that Ling was saying that resonates with me is the, like when you're talking about the experience and the observer,
Right.
And like how negative, whatever. You people can look at the exact same thing and have very different takes on how disastrous this is or how promising it is. I often feel like that comes down to basically, are you someone who feels like they are just kind of stuck in this and needs to like make the best of it, needs to find out where they can make some little inroads? Or are you someone who sees themselves as like on the outside and is just like evaluating what this thing is? So like you could look at, say like for me, it's, China-US relations for the last 4 years. And you could look at it from a slight remove and be like, this is clearly a total unmitigated disaster. There's like, until very recently, there's almost nothing that's going well. And that's like pretty maybe accurate at like a macro level assessment. But if you can find your niche where you feel embedded and like invested in it, and you just say like, I know it sucks. I know it really, really sucks at a macro level, but there is something that I can do. Do you feel any agency of like, is there some little corner that I can work on and chip away at? Or if you're in the system and you're like, okay, overall, this is so much more constricted on arts and culture. And I know that from the outside, like the answer is it's just constricted and it sucks. But like, if you're stuck in that system and you're an artist, you're like, well, I got to do something. Like I'm going to do something. And then you start to, I don't know, just chip away at it. It's some kind of switch in perspective that to me feels, it's my way out of like total despair, is to be like in this one little tiny corner of AI-ish stuff-ish, I can see a little bit of progress. I can see a little thing that I can do. And that's, it's super motivating compared to like a macro level, just like I'm going to assess this thing and the assessment is it sucks.
Yeah. I guess one way I've been trying to think about it is like, as opposed to like thinking about things from a macro perspective, is just like get into as many of those little micro perspectives as possible. And it's still not always pretty. That's what I've realized. Like I always wonder at what point like having optimism crosses into having false hope. And you never want to like mix the two. I mean, maybe false hope is a good thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like if you're a musician, you can still create music you like, just like take out 90% of the stuff you want to say. You know what I mean?
Here's one weirdly optimistic thing. I didn't think it that way at all until a friend who recently just left China, she tells me this observation. She's like, before you tell people like I'm from China and people are like, how many people are there, which city, where's your hometown, these kind of questions. But now the whole world has a shared experience called COVID, and everybody can just ramble about how stupid their government and how fucked up their life. So there's a weird connectivity. I think her exact word is 寰宇皆傻逼，就是this shared 傻逼ness somehow bring people closer.
If only people in the two countries could like hear how much shit they talk about their own governments, it would be a real like bonding experience. Instead, they look and they like believe that everyone is like perfectly aligned with their leaders.
Everyone's like shit in the same way, basically. There's a lot of shared kind of solidarity in that.
Or we just solved it. Nihilism is the key.
Tony, what is your homegoing situation?
So right now, where I'm living right now, I have a small but robust circle of Chinese diaspora friends. And they somehow create a lot of encounters. They have friends coming and their parents are visiting. All of that, I feel home is coming to me. That's a very weird, because I accompanied a lot of friends in the process of like, we meet each other again and they meet with the world again, and all these kind of weird sensations start to like awaken. It's so emotional. Even every goodbye becomes a little bit heavier. Before it's like, okay, I'm gonna be in this country, and if you're there, yeah, we can hang out. That's how we end cross-continental encounter. And now it's more like, I don't know when I'm gonna see you again, but I'm sure we will. I don't know. How about you guys?
I'm interested in your experience on this one, because it's like listening to the podcast, it's like it's a series of therapy sessions in some way, mutual therapy sessions. People either who have just come from or just left, or I don't know. It's been fascinating. I felt like when I was in Beijing, the kind of cool kid journalist scene, which I hope that I was not a part of, but the cool kid like Hutong journalist scene that was there, I always felt like it was there was some aspiration of like, maybe we're kind of like Paris in the 1920s, like the last really cool diaspora. And I was always like, nah, I don't think so. I don't think this is Paris 1920. Now, every once in a while, I'm looking at Chiang Mai, I'm like, I don't know. There's something special going on there. And I don't know. It's very cool to kind of watch along as people digest it, live on your podcast.
Thanks. I don't know.
It's obviously that comparison is inherently ridiculous, but it's...
No, I definitely have that. That feeling comes after a certain number of cocktails. Yeah. In a very awkward segue, I know, Ling, you went to a friend's wedding. Is it an emotional thing? Like you go to their wedding, and it's not in Beijing, right?
Yeah, it was in Hunan. But to make that segue a little smoother, Tony, but I mean, it was emotional. This trip was incredibly emotional. It was a homecoming. It was going to a wedding, which is like, on one hand, you're seeing like two of your extremely good friends like come together, celebrate their love with their family. You're also like, this is a wedding in China after COVID. So like it's a coming together of friends who you haven't seen in like 4 years. So it's like a reunion, it's a wedding, it's like a nostalgia tour. It's like, holy shit, everything has changed. I'm so sad. I used to have like all my best friends here. Now 95% are gone. And here are the 5% stragglers who are remaining. And they're telling me they're sad. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, I fell in love with here. I got my heart broken here. I fell in love again here. So there's like this element of China has changed. The pandemic has changed us. And then also like I was a young person and now I'm old. And it's very hard to like extricate all of those feelings. They all bleed into each other. I'm projecting onto the space, which is not fair to the space. The space has changed me, which is not fair to me, and it was just like a shit show. Like on my last day, and I went there with my partner and he was gonna move, so like there's like goodbyes, and I spent the whole last day on my own just like cycling around Beijing, and I just like sat in one of the most unromantic restaurants, Aero Factory Brewing, like very just like annoyingly expat-y. It used to be very annoyingly expat-y. Now it's like all embassy parents and their families. And I was just sitting there alone having like a falafel wrap. And I just started crying because it was so much. Like I had just processed so much over the past 2 weeks because of all those feelings, I guess, And I think a lot of it is China has changed. We can go into that as we have. But a lot of it is just like youth and friends. And like one moment where I actually got kind of emotional during the wedding, obviously the wedding itself, but one of my friends I hadn't seen since 2020. And the last time I saw her, we were all going to Hohai to jump into the lake in January. I didn't jump, and I was like, next year I'm going to jump. I never jumped, right? Because I just didn't have a crew to jump with. And they were all just jumping into this icy lake. That was the last time I saw her.
Oh my god, that's your 阳光灿烂的日子.
Yeah, I mean, right? It's just like out of a movie. And like this was a period of time where I like just oriented my week around fun. Like on Monday I would get up and be like, what fun thing am I going to do this weekend? So like one weekend we took a bus out to Chongli, and the bus just had like 5 kegs on it. And so the entire weekend was just skiing in Chongli, completely just like messed up. And for some reason or the other, I wouldn't do this now, we all decided to buy onesies on Taobao. And so I had this like baby blue onesie with like a elephant head, and my friend had this onesie that was iconic. She ended up vomiting in the onesie. See, I'm also like, as I say this, I'm like, this is too indulgent. It's just like, but yeah, at the wedding, because she left so abruptly and like had still boxes at the friend's spot, she like opened the box and pulled out this onesie. I thought I was gonna cry.
The one with vomit, or
she cleaned it after. She claimed she cleaned it after. But I was just like, I did not think this like America pattern onesie would make me so emotional.
No, this is like the Chinese version of traveling pants or something like American onesie.
Oh god. Yeah. So I guess the broader point that I want to make here is like, everyone's observations of China, be if they're Chinese or not Chinese and they live in China for a period of time, is going to be colored by their own subjective lens and their experiences, be it a onesie or a ho-hi dip. And to pretend that we don't have these subjective lenses, which I think is often the case when it comes to media coverage, is just wrong. And we shouldn't be demanding stories that are like, this is China.
Right.
Because that person who wrote This is China is going to have their own onesie experience that inevitably shaped their opinion, And so it's just like funny that I even have to say that, right? Because like we don't really think about this.
No, I feel so strongly about this. I feel there's a lot of coverage of China that captured the factual truth, but not the emotional truth. How do people feel? Because emotional truth, American emotional truth is very important to American audience, to the global audience, how they feel about Trump, how they feel about certain things. But China is just this China. This is how Chinese people do this. And there's a saying within the journalism circle. So there's a good China, bad China, crazy China, or something like that, right? So there are 3 China stories. But emotions are so much more nuanced and complicated, and they carry a lot of truth and history. No, I'm just rambling now.
No, but I think this is one of the things that makes me really sad, but maybe it's whatever, an opportunity to do something good, is like the lack of popular culture that is coming out of China and making it into the U.S. mainstream. And like there are, obviously people like debate this endlessly, and why is this, and is it censorship, and is it this, and like it's all those things clearly, but there is a lot of really good like popular culture that comes out of China and that just doesn't make it into the US. And like when you want to convey emotional truth, I just don't think, like, generally speaking, journalists are not equipped, or they do not have the medium to convey emotional truth unless you happen to have a very unique platform that lets you do, voices and audio and video and all this like stuff that isn't kind of clickbait in some way. But like to get the emotional truth of a country, you kind of need to watch like them tell stories about themselves. And obviously a lot of stories about China are just not going to be told because they cannot be told like within, or they can't be told within China. But there is a lot of good stuff that does convey like real emotional truths about the present day country that just doesn't get translated, or somehow it just doesn't compute into an international audience.
Also podcasts. What you're doing, Tony. I mean, literally, I just don't think any of the stories that we are hearing on your podcast appear anywhere else, right? And that's kind of...
I hope. Thank you. That makes me so happy.
Yeah, it's a nice little praise, Tony.
I mean, okay, to be more concrete, like a lot of the things that we talked about on this podcast, I probably would just like write about it in an article, just like there's no space for that type of thing. But, like documents of daily conversations, right? So like, I think, okay, so like one story that you often see is like youth unemployment is on the rise. Everyone's unemployed, blah, 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 20% of young people are unemployed. And, going to Beijing was the only point where I could like put that fact and like attach it, not necessarily attach it, but like contextualize it and like hear it in stories. And like, okay, so one story that I wouldn't tell anywhere else other than in this medium is like, I got a massage. And every time I get a massage, I have really bad lower back issues. And there's this one salon that's just incredible. And I talked to the lady who massaged me for like the whole hour. And we just have like very real, like we just had a very, very real conversation. I was just like, you're fucking awesome. Like we just talked about everything. We talked about One Belt, One Road. She was talking about how there are all these Russians coming in, we talked about, but I think the story that really gave me such insight was her relationship with her daughter. Because this woman is like maybe in her 60s and she's been working in massage therapy for like 12 years. She's from Harbin. And she was like, when I started out, I was like really excited to go see the world. I left Harbin for Beijing. Like I was making much more money than my parents were. And she was just like, life just kept moving forward. I was making more and more money. I was getting better. I wanted to bring, a better life for my daughter. And now I think she just turned into a grandma. Her daughter had a child. And she was speaking with her daughter with like almost like disdain. Like not disdain, but like, like the kid who's just like less cool than you, because her daughter spent like after graduating from college, spent a year just like 在北京混，就是在想看看能不能在体制外工作。But then she did a year and she gave up and then decided 她还是想在体制内工作。 回到哈尔滨结婚生孩子得去这工作 and her daughter like maybe earns like a quarter of what she does. You know what I mean?
Wow.
And she's like, yeah, she doesn't want to explore anywhere. She doesn't want to travel anywhere. Meanwhile, her 6-year-old mom is like hustling, like making 5 times the amount she is, like traveling to Thailand with the massage group, traveling to Hong Kong. And I was just like, wow, like there is just this feeling of like regression. Maybe regression is the wrong word, but like 前一代看不起后一代, you know? Because they want the stability and security of a job at a point where that's just not possible anymore, but they also like wouldn't want to do the kind of manual labor you know that people associate with massage work. It was just such a like perfect encapsulation of this dynamic. But you would never read that in a news article, right? You would read like 20% of the young people are unemployed.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So that's why I feel so far podcast, the format gives me a lot of hope. I feel there's a lot more stories, a lot more nuanced stories about people, their own lives. Yeah, I'm obsessed with like Chinese queer podcasts. There's a whole scene out there and different podcasts. And when I listen to them, I feel like I never get to be that kind of gay. Never like allow myself that kind of liberty. I didn't really spend like a proper coming out life in China. And I realized, okay, I would never get that.
And these are like mainland Chinese-based podcasts?
Yeah.
Wow.
Just them talking about dating, talking about their daily queer life, I feel. It's pretty cool. Ling, you went to your friend's wedding, and Matt, did you get to see your old friends?
Yeah, I spent some time with like my Frisbee friends, spent some time with some foreigners who were there. I think like for me, I need 3 or 4 more of these trips, and I especially need to go back to Xi'an. Like Xi'an is where my sort of like oldest or deepest roots are.
老家?
老家真是我老家. Yeah, I mean, that's where I need to go. And I think I'm feeling okay with being kind of patient in some way. And I feel like that's generally my attitude towards China is like in the present, things can be quite dark, but you know, if you look at it with a little bit longer time scale, things maybe aren't not so depressing. And so I'm like, okay, maybe next trip it's Beijing and Xi'an. Then it's, you know, then just a purely fun trip to Xi'an because I don't know, the things that Ling's described with the wedding and stuff like that, that's so far and away the best and like most memorable part of living there. Yeah, I need to slowly integrate that back into my life in a more meaningful way because I miss it a lot.
Matt, I have a question. Do you see like the work and social worlds coming together, like becoming buddies with the safety community, you know, of which there is, you know, there's a small version community. So.
Yeah. I think for a while I was like full on life work integration, no difference, which I was writing a book about China-California ties. And my like, whenever my friends would be like, you know, why are you doing that? Like, what is this? I was like, China-Fornia, it's a lifestyle. And I just treated it as a lifestyle. I was like, am I researching? Am I just hanging out? Am I making money? Am I trying to become like a Wang Hong? Like it's all, who knows? It's all mixed in there. And did that for a while. And then it was very intense. And like, as I've gone on in the work, I've just become more and more specialized. And honestly, my work has just become more and more quote unquote serious in a way that is not fun at all. And it's hard to get that like fun life balance reintegrated with work. I try to, you know, just like be a genuine person with my work. So even if I'm talking to like a Chinese scholar of blah, 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 you know, on some serious topic, I try to like be a genuine person and, you know, in some sense, genuinely make friends with them. But it is a different, and this is just like phases of life stuff too. It is a different phase than like, I'm 25, like I'm going to interview you and then we're going to get wasted. And then like, you know, then we're both going to play in this tournament and like, you know, whatever, just like life, work, smash up, blur. It's a different phase, but yeah, there's a lot of old man thinking going on in my life these days. And a lot of it is like, you know, those were good days and now you're, you know, what you are. So I'll keep my fun slightly separate from work in this New York cool kid scene that I try to hang on to.
That sounds like prudent, honestly. I might take a leaf from your book.
Book writing completely consumes you in some way, you know.
I feel I worked really, really hard during the pandemic time, even though, you know, at a point, like nobody has a job. And then I just, throw myself full swing. And I do notice, I'm convinced at least that there is a sense of escapism there. I don't want to think about other how horrible the whole thing is. I can't really travel anywhere. I've just spent like 3 winters in New York, so I just work. And now I'm learning like how to stop. It's kind of like stepping on a brake, and that's hard.
I remember that one time we collaborated, Tony. You were like messaging me at like 5 p.m. my time. So like a normal, healthy human time for me. Yeah. But like crazy time for you.
I had to get up at 5 a.m. for Asia meetings kind of on a daily basis. And yeah, I get off work probably around midnight. I think that's fine. It's not healthy at all. I don't recommend anyone do it. But I think it actually wore me down is all the stories are pretty horrible. And you have to think about your sources, your field producers, and people who are involved in the stories. You feel highly responsible. And it's when combine that with the intensity of work. Matt went for 甄嬛传, I went for 康熙来了. Within 3 months of my depression, I watched 12 years worth of 康熙来了. I pretty much turned it on the whole time. Yeah, thank you too for just autoplay. And then I realized I just need somebody speaking Chinese on things that are not triggering.
This is me and NBA podcasts. I've gone through years where like I can write about completely different things while just listening to people talk about like the Western Conference Player of the Month issues, and I do think it's not a good sign for my well-being, the amount of NBA podcasts I need to consume in order to feel like stable.
For me, it's like not old British TV shows about old British people. So like, because I spent a lot of this year just very sick. Like with fevers, and I got COVID, and it was just like it did its damage. And so I just periodically throughout the year find myself with a fever. I think it was first like the Harry and Meghan documentary. Like just I watched all of it in one go. Yeah. And then it was like most recently I had a fever, and it was the Beckham documentary. Right.
It's good stuff.
All of The Crown, like just like old British people and all their drama, like really helpful.
Yeah, a friend of mine, one day we discovered our shared obsession with trashy Korean TV. I think we're both watching Mr. Queen, which is the Korean version of 太子妃升职记. Just like a man reincarnated into a woman's body, like in the past. And it's like, as long as we're not working, we try not to consume anything that's too realistic.
Yeah, what did people do before they could just constantly stream audio and video content like directly into their eyeballs and ears? It's frightening how reliant we become on this, and it's something that I'm correctly chided for and disciplined by the people in my life.
Oh my God, this reminds me that when a lot of my friends, relatives, they come to visit, especially for the older generation, I'm utterly shocked how glued they are to their phones. 短视频 culture and all of that. I thought I was a heavy mobile phone user. No.
Actually, this time going back to Beijing, I think one thing that surprised me was like how intense 直播带货 culture is. Because I'd read stories, worked on stories that were about 直播带货, but from outside. And like, it seems like just like everyone and their mom has gotten into live stream e-commerce. Like, people have just quit their jobs, and everyone's trying to be, what's his face? Yu Minghong, Michael Yu. Yeah, because like, you know, like he had New Oriental, and then afterwards he just started live streaming like vegetables and stuff. Yeah, and they were like, okay, if he can have such a successful career pivot, like maybe I can also just like live stream North Face jackets and sell those, and like live stream this, like, but you know, like everywhere I went, it was just like, actually in Changsha when I was there for the wedding, like one restaurant, it was just like 4 people sitting around their meal in complete silence with the most sophisticated camera equipment. They're making a buck out of that. 直播带货. Actually, with this lady that I spoke to, the lady who massaged me, I was like, 好像现在只有年轻人有2个方向，一个就是在体制内工作，一个就是直播带货。
直播小红书。
Yeah, that's it. That's kind of it. I mean, that's a huge reductive statement, so I take that back. But
the sense of shock is real. It doesn't matter how generalizable it is. It's something that I know, like in concept, that's a big thing going on. But when I see it firsthand, I realize this is something that happened when I'm not there. I didn't witness the rise of it. You know, all these technology advances, like at least like WeChat payment and 美团, 饿了么, that I see those technology,
I have a relationship with them. I'm an early adopter. And yeah, it helped me. This has nothing to do with me. So it feels very weird and strange.
Exactly. Because like with something like WeChat and all the apps, you like first experience it, right? First you're on WeChat and you're using all the time. And then the like New York Times reports stuff come out like 2 years later that are like, everyone's on WeChat. But with this one, it's like, first you see the McKinsey report that says 50% of Chinese people have tried live stream e-commerce in your life. And you're like, no, that's crazy. I've never seen that. And you go and you're like, oh my gosh, everyone is live stream e-commercing like literally every part of their life. So
yeah. I think another thing I kind of miss is 共享单车,共享充电宝. Yeah, these are the kind of like, I know their existence, I kind of use it once or twice, but 直播带货, I remember I almost finished a story for one of the documentary series that I produced about 直播带货 when it just became a thing, like around like early 2020, when it became huge during the pandemic. That's when there is a news pack. And then the news pack is gone. It has become a normalized part of Chinese day-to-day life. And I'm not a part of it, and I don't know how to relate.
You know, I think on balance, it's okay to not have a super close relationship to 直播带货. That's one that I'm okay with missing. 共享单车 was really cool, but the 直播带货, you know, I'm good.
you'd be great in that. I can see you being an excellent live streamer.
Yeah. Ling, did you end up trying 直播带货? Not like you go on, did you try buy anything?
It's just too close. Do you know what I mean? I think one day I will step over the line and it'll happen. Yeah. But no, not yet. Like I haven't bought anything from Pinduoduo or anything yet.
When I think about it, I did technically try to sell Frisbees online in 2015, 2016. Not 直播, but I did a series of videos with a company that the business plan was first make these videos, get big, and then sell Frisbees. And I left the country before I got rich. If I'd stuck around for another 5 years until it hit, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like most of the questions that I have. I wonder like if you guys have any questions for each other or anything that you want to talk about. Like, actually, no, there's one big question. How did I miss this? Like, do you still see there, doesn't matter if it's Beijing, China, or Liangmaqiao, or where, do you still see it as home?
I mean, when I got there, I felt like, the feeling of being home in a way. And, you know, home, what is home, blah, blah, blah. You know, you could think about that indefinitely, but I felt grounded. I felt back in like comfort zone. I felt back where like so much meaningful stuff and meaningful like emotional growth in my life had happened. And so it did feel like home, you know, whatever. Apartment building, it's all different. Everybody's, you know, everything's changed, but there's something to just like the physical presence in the city that still felt that way and still felt super emotional experience.
Yeah, it's a pretty fraught question. I think it is home in the sense that like I haven't really recreated that experience anywhere else. Like I'm just like most of my adulthood I spent in Beijing. And I haven't really done that after I left very abruptly. There was no like goodbye party. There was no like visiting all the spots and like saying bye to all the people. Everyone just kind of very underwhelmingly trickled out at different times because of the pandemic. But like, you know, I spent the ages of like 22 to 28 in this city, and like that period of your life is just like very formative. So I haven't had that since then. And so this time was like kind of in some ways, sadly, the kind of closure that I was looking for. It wasn't like re-entry as much as like, oh, I can finally say goodbye to these places. But it was just a little sad. And I think this is like a recurring theme among some friends who have left, which is like their farewell parties. All the people they know aren't there anymore. It's just like new people at their farewell party, which is just kind of sad. Yeah, so it is the only home I've known, but it's also not really home anymore. Like I don't go back thinking like, 我来了,回家了, you know what I mean? So yeah, a little torn on that. I'm looking forward to recreating what I had in Beijing elsewhere, but I don't think I will recreate what I had in Beijing, if that makes sense.
来纽约吧.
Or Chiang Mai.
Yeah, Chiang Mai or纽约, that's which one, who knows.
ever since we started talking about this episode, there's one 成语 just keep like circling in my head called 近乡情怯, 就是 the closer you get to home, the more kind of mixed feelings you have and the more shy you become. Even though I don't even know where home is, but I feel probably that place in my mind, that's the only place that can still cause that kind of emotion for me. And that's something. So I'm so grateful for both of you guys. And I'm so glad we have this conversation. It helps me process a lot of things that I don't know. I think both of you guys at some point, you said some things I'm like, okay, this is exactly what I thought.
It's weird, like considering how much we started with a depressing, like different. It's like how much time do we just spend laughing? Like there's always good stuff. People are gonna find the good stuff.
For sure.
Just as only we can figure out how to use WeChat Pay.
Oh yeah.
Get the Chinese number. That's the key. All right, Tony, you're gonna make us sound reasonable and not ridiculous.
I can't promise not ridiculous. No, it's gonna be great. I love this talk.